Victor Hale lifted a crystal flute, and the ballroom went silent as if the chandeliers themselves were holding their breath. "Tonight," he said, voice smooth and practiced, "my son will choose his new mother." Beside him, 5 exquisitely dressed women stood poised beneath a shower of flashbulbs. Their smiles were flawless, their jewelry flawless, their intentions flawless in their usefulness to a man like Victor. He had built Hale Dynamics from fire and leverage, and he treated people with the same arithmetic as assets: acquire, merge, discard. Ethan Hale, 8 years old, clung to his father's trouser leg. His shoes were polished, his hair perfectly parted, and his eyes were fixed on the marble floor as if the veining might open and swallow him whole. The room hummed with the greed of spectators disguised as guests. They wanted a show, and Victor always delivered one. "First, Ms. Vivienne Armand," Victor announced. Vivienne stepped forward, tall, effortlessly elegant, the human embodiment of a luxury brand. Her red dress burned under the lights. He introduced her pedigree like a resume: old banking money, a portfolio larger than most nations' budgets, and a smile that signed contracts without ink. Vivienne crouched, careful with the gown, and offered Ethan a hand he did not take. "You and I will restore a house to its rightful glory," she said. "Dynasties are built by those unafraid to lead." The word rested cold and heavy in the boy's ears. Dynasty. He did not know what it meant, but he could feel how much it cost. Next came Dr. Naomi Stroud, a renowned economist with the gaze of a person who calibrated people like markets. "Do you know what a black hole is, Ethan?" she asked brightly. "Its gravity is so intense not even light can escape." The boy looked down again. He did not want to speak about gravity. He already felt pulled into something that would devour him. Then Leela Dresden, model, philanthropist, the public's darling, waved softly, promising sunlight vacations and cameras that loved them. Alina Cortez, a tech magnate with sharp cheekbones and sharper instincts, slipped a platinum card into his pocket with a wink. "So you can build your own empire," she whispered, as if empires were toys on a shelf. Finally, Catherine Bell, the sainted face of 3 foundations and a dozen galas, patted Ethan's hair. "We will help the world together," she said, already picturing the headlines. They were speaking to Victor. They were speaking to the room. They were speaking to the cameras. They were not speaking to him. On the edge of the ballroom, in the shadowed border where light lost interest, a woman pushed a cart with a grey bucket and a coil of cotton towels. She wore a navy uniform that made her invisible by design. She was there to erase the night's fingerprints. Her name was Mara. Ethan's eyes kept drifting to that edge of the room, as if it were a shoreline, and he a tired swimmer. Mara did not look at the stage. She lifted glasses by their stems, tucked chairs back beneath tables, wiped a ring of condensation like she was lifting a bruise from the table's skin. She moved with quiet, spare economy, the opposite of the room's excess. Victor followed his son's gaze and found the source of the distraction. Irritation tightened his jaw. He needed his production, his power, uninterrupted. "Excuse me," he said into the microphone, and warmth fell from his tone like a mask. He left the stage, descending into the crowd, the way a ruler might descend into the city to remind it who owned the streets. He didn't go to Mara. He stopped inches from a tower of glassware glittering on a bar. With a motion so slight it could pass as clumsiness, his cuff nudged the stem of a chilled bottle. It fell, exploded on the marble. Gold liquid ran like a wound. Shards of green glass skittered to the toes of Mara's scuffed shoes. Every conversation snapped shut. Victor turned slowly to her. He wasn't angry. Anger was human, spontaneous. What shone in his eyes was colder. "You're in the way," he said. Guilt descended on her like a verdict with no judge and no appeal. Truth did not matter. Power did. Mara's throat worked around a knot. She reached for the towels on her cart with hands that had scrubbed 1,000 floors and held a dying parent's fingers through a long night. She bent. Vivian's smile glinted. She saw opportunity. "A lesson?" she purred as she rejoined Victor, her voice sweet with venom. "For the boy. There's an order to the world, and he must learn to give orders." She nudged a linen napkin with the spike of her heel until it lay in the puddle. "On your knees, dear. That's what you're paid for, isn't it?" No one laughed, but something in the room relaxed. Cruelty performed with confidence is a narcotic at expensive parties. A few guests shifted, uneasy. Most watched with the hunger of people who had been told they were better and were desperate to believe it. Mara knelt. The marble was cold and, like the night, very clean. She gathered the shards as if they could still be dangerous even after breaking. Her movements were careful, precise. Dignity was not in refusing the order, it was in refusing to be diminished by obeying it. On stage, Ethan's fear cracked like thin ice. He pulled his hand from his father's without realizing he'd been holding it. His small fists balled at his sides. He looked at Vivian's victorious mouth, at his father's blank eyes, and then at the woman on her knees who was making a broken thing safe again. He did not know what he would do. He knew only what he would not. Mara finished. She rose, placed the glass in the cart's bin, and turned toward the service door. Leaving was the only protest available to the powerless. The quiet of it made noise. Victor reclaimed the stage as if the interruption had been a mere cough. "Now," he said, smile restored, "Ethan, tell our guests who will be your new mother. Make your choice." The room tilted toward the boy, the way a field of sunflowers turns toward heat. Ethan did not move. The silence lengthened, and the women's smiles tightened the way silk does when it's pulled too hard. Victor's brow drew down. He breathed in to repeat the command. Ethan looked up, and when he did, he looked differently. One by one he met each woman's gaze, and something steady and very old in him was awake. He saw promises like glitter on the surface of deep water. He saw the emptiness behind them, the rooms where he would live like a trophy with a pulse. He shook his head. The sound in the room was not a sound. It was a collective intake, mouths opening as if to catch a falling thing. Victor took a step, voice softening into threat. "Ethan!" The boy climbed down from the velvet block, descended the stairs and began to walk. The crowd parted for him, instinct stronger than manners. His shoes ticked on the marble. No one reached out to stop him. There is something dangerous about a child who has stopped being afraid. He reached the service door, pushed it. It swung in. Mara had her hand on the back exit's bar. Tears she had refused in public found her in private. She turned, expecting a manager, a reprimand, a dismissal. A small hand was held out to her. Ethan did not speak. His hand trembled, but he kept it there, offering her the only thing he could offer that mattered. She placed her palm against his. The skin of a worker is a map. His fingers closed hard, and something locked into place inside them both. He led her back through the door, across the seam where bright became dim, where important became invisible. He brought her into the center of the Empire's stage and stopped on the place where champagne had run. He lifted their joined hands high, a small banner. Then he looked at his father. There was no fear left in that look, only decision. A single exhale moved through the room like wind through wheat. The party ended in that breath. The war began in the one after. Their hands remained joined as silence rearranged the furniture of power. No one in that room understood the origin of a bond strong enough to pull a boy from the gravity of a billionaire. To understand it, you would have to go backward, past the gala, past the rehearsed smiles, past the cruelty, to a quiet Tuesday afternoon in a house that had forgotten how to be a home. But in this moment, none of that was visible. There was only a child and the woman he had chosen. A kingdom and its king looked suddenly very small. Victor's face did not redden, it hardened. He lifted a hand and security glided from the walls like well-trained shadows, forming a discreet ring around father, son and maid. With a choreography learned in crises, the ring closed and moved, escorting them through a corridor hidden behind a velvet drape. The crowd did what crowds do when the scent of blood touches polished air. They scattered to their cars and their phones, carrying the story like lit kindling into the city's night. In the private library, the cameras finally couldn't see. Books lined the walls in ranks, unread and expensive. Ethan still held Mara's hand. He looked at his father with a question that was not a question. "Are you going to be a man or a machine?" Victor did not answer. He waved, and a nanny waited at the door. Ethan's fingers tightened. He would not let go. Mara knelt once more, but now by choice. "It's all right," she whispered to him, voice calm, the way a quiet shore speaks to waves. "I'm here." Only when he trusted the words did he let the nanny lead him out. Victor turned to Mara. He opened a drawer, took out a checkbook, and laid it on the desk like a weapon that fired numbers. "Name your price," he said. "7 figures. You'll wake in another country and never see my son again." Mara's eyes dropped to the blank space where a sum might live. She thought of rent, of medicines, of nights she'd counted coins and chosen which need would go hungry. Temptation opened like a gilded door. Then she remembered a small hand reaching into a room where she'd been invisible, remembered what it felt like to be seen. She lifted her eyes. "He is not for sale," she said, "and neither am I." Victor tore the check slowly, the way a person might pluck wings from an insect to calm themselves. "Then you've chosen the hard road," he said softly, "and I will make sure it is hard." Outside the library windows, a city glittered, steel and glass, numbers in the air, power pretending to be the weather. Inside, something actually powerful had happened. A boy had chosen mercy over magnificence. The Empire did not yet know it had been wounded. It would. It would learn that night that even the richest gravity can be broken by a small hand refusing to let go. And when it learned, the learning would cost. The Hale residence was a museum that refused to admit it. Light fell through 2-story panes and landed cold on polished floors. Rooms existed to be photographed, not inhabited. The staff called the place a house because mausoleum was not in the handbook. 3 months had passed since the funeral. Photographs remained on mantels, like exhibits in a wing dedicated to a woman the building had already begun to forget. Ethan's world had contracted to the size of his bedroom, where expensive toys stood at attention, unplayed and unneeded. He sat cross-legged on a Persian rug, shoulders bowed, holding a small wooden airplane his mother had carved on a rainy afternoon from scrap wood, laughing when one wing ended up slightly shorter than the other. "Imperfect," she had said, "and therefore ours." Last week it had fallen in the night. The wing snapped. He had tried to fix it with glue that dried milky and weak, then with clear tape that held like a bandage on a wound that still bled. The break remained. He turned the little plane over and over, as if his hands could remember how hers had done it. Downstairs, his father's voice drifted up through the whole house audio like a weather report for a distant city. Earnings, guidance, shareholder value. Adults spoke of tides of money the way children speak of monsters. He was a boy with a living father who felt like an orphan. The bedroom door clicked. Mara stepped in with her cart, the routine mapped in her bones. Dust the shelves, empty the bins, wipe the prints no one admitted to leaving. The staff manual instructed invisibility. They were to pass like weather, noticed perhaps but not seen. She stopped. The boy's shoulders told a story the manual did not cover. Protocol said, "Leave." Heart said, "Stay." Mara closed the door gently, sealing off the house's echo. She did not approach him like a nurse to a patient or a teacher to a pupil. She lowered herself to the rug opposite him and folded her legs. She placed her hands palm down on her knees and waited. Quiet was a language. She spoke it. After a while, the tide of his breathing changed. He slid the airplane across the rug toward her without looking up. It reached the sole of her shoe and knocked softly, like a request at a door. She picked it up. Work-worn fingers turned gentle. The break was clean, cruel in its simplicity. She pressed the pieces together. They kissed and fell away. Mara searched the pockets of her apron. People like Victor bought solutions. People like Mara carried them, a paperclip, a rubber band, a toothpick in a paper sleeve. She aligned the wing and the fuselage and braced them with the toothpick like a splint set on a fragile bone. She bound the joint in tight loops, rubber drawing the wood together with quiet insistence. The repair was not elegant, but it was honest. Intention made visible, 5 slow minutes, a small surgery performed with contraband compassion. She set the plane between them. The seam was visible, the wing held. Ethan touched the banding with a fingertip, felt the rasp of the rubber, the smoothness of the toothpick edge. He looked up. The look said what thank you could not reach. She answered with a small nod that promised nothing and meant everything. I saw you. Mara stood, returned the room to its curated order, and slid back into the anonymous machinery of the house. The door closed softly. The boy flew the plane once around his head, felt it catch air, felt something else catch with it, a thread tying the broken to the whole. In a different wing of the mansion, Victor paused outside a locked room he never entered. The scent of his late wife's perfume had thinned, but not vanished. He gripped the handle, then released it, choosing instead the known corridors of ledgers and contracts. He believed survival was noise and motion, not the quiet of grief. Men like him often believed that until something immovable, like a child, refused to move for them. The house resumed its whispering. Cleaners drifted like weather. The audio system announced a calendar reminder in a cheerful voice. Somewhere, a clock ticked with aristocratic restraint. And yet, on that Tuesday, the building remembered it had once contained a heart. Not because of a grand gesture, but because a woman with a cart dared to be human for 5 minutes in a room where humanity had been laid off. The next afternoons passed like beads on a string. Mara returned to her route. Ethan learned the schedule of her shadow. He listened for the wheel's soft rattle at the end of the hall, for the brief, illicit island of attention that came with it. She would straighten the books he did not read and ask no questions. He would hold up small problems, an unraveling cuff, a toy with a stubborn screw, and watch her find answers with patience and pockets. They spoke little. Grief had stolen the language from him. Labor had taught silence to her. Connection is not only made of words. Once in the garden, he found her snapping a dead stem from a pot of herbs the cook had abandoned. Dirt darkened the lines of her palm. She noticed him watching and, without drama, pressed a small daisy into his hand, the kind children pick for free and billionaires forget exists. He carried it back to his room like contraband joy and set it in a cup of water beside the patched airplane. Inside Mara's phone, a cheap device with a cracked corner, were pharmacy reminders and an overdue notice for the assisted living facility where her mother's good days had grown thin. She took extra shifts. She took buses in the dark. She took her lunch in 10-minute gulps in laundry rooms and loading docks. She took nothing from anyone she could not repay. Sometimes, late, she studied listings for office cleaning gigs and counted the hours she had left to sell. She calculated the price of dignity like rent and found it steep, but paid it anyway. On the 4th Tuesday, Ethan caught her in the corridor and held up a sheet of drawing paper. On it, a thin plane traced in pencil, a rubber band brace carefully drawn on the wing. She understood. The drawing was not about an object. It was a map of repair. She stuck it to his wall with a piece of painter's tape scavenged from a toolbox, aligning it until it was straight. Level, she said, the single word landing like a shared secret. He smiled with half his mouth, a child's gratitude making its first clumsy return. The house, allergic to tenderness, tried to snuff it out with schedules. Victor's calendar expanded to swallow the days. Meetings bred meetings. He told himself the boy needed structure, rigor, a blueprint for inheritance. He did not see that a blueprint without warmth builds a mausoleum. Then came the gala announcement. The public would be reminded that the machine still hummed. The shareholders would be fed. The brand would be burnished. And privately, a father would solve his most inconvenient problem: how to replace a wife without engaging a heart. Victor did not consult his son. He consulted stylists and PR executives. He consulted a discreet matchmaker whose clients never waited in lobbies. The shortlist glittered. The narrative wrote itself. In the quiet, after the decision, Victor passed Mara in a hallway for perhaps the 10th time that year and recognized her for the first. Recognition is not always mercy. He saw the uniform and what it represented, a variable he had failed to control. "You," he said, pausing, not because he knew her name, but because power prefers to fix the world in place. "Make sure the family wing is impeccable for Saturday." "Yes, sir," she answered, the words smooth from 1,000 sirs that had passed through them. He walked on. Some men mistake obedience for order and think both are love. Saturday arrived wearing chandeliers and ice. The stage was set, the candidates briefed, the cameras hungry. On the far rim of the room, a boy searched the edges for the one person who had repaired something that mattered to him. He found her because hearts, like stars, are located not by maps, but by felt constellations. And when the spectacle became cruelty, when a woman in red turned a napkin into a commandment, Ethan remembered rubber and toothpick and 5 minutes that had kept a small world from coming apart. He turned from the stage to the margin. He reached. People would later speak about the moment in headlines and hushed gossip. They would argue over his audacity, her manipulation, his father's hubris. They would assign motives to strangers and make content of pain. None of them were in this room on a Tuesday when a boy who couldn't breathe was given back a little air. The empire would fall, if it fell, because of many causes. But its first crack ran along the grain of that small repair. Proof that a broken thing held with care can hold. That is why, when the choice came, it was not a surprise to the only two people who mattered. It was simply the next honest step. The ballroom did not forget. Spectacle leaves scars on marble as much as it leaves bruises on pride. News outlets ran the clip of Ethan holding Mara's hand in endless loops. Headlines screamed betrayal, humiliation, scandal. Billionaire's son chooses maid over heiresses. The media loved nothing more than watching gold lose its shine. Victor Hale spent the following morning in a conference room lined with glass and steel, his empire's generals seated around the table. Investors, lawyers, PR strategists, all armed with charts and contracts. "This is a crisis," one of them said. Victor's jaw worked as he stared out over the city skyline. "No, this is an error. Errors are corrected." Across town, in a modest apartment with peeling paint and a view of a laundry line, Mara sat at a small table with her mother, whose health had been failing for months. The older woman sipped weak tea and whispered, "What did you do, child?" Mara shook her head. "Nothing. He chose. I was only there." "I was only..." But the city would not accept such simplicity. Reporters camped outside the building. Neighbors whispered. At work, staff avoided her, afraid that the empire's wrath might spill onto anyone near her shadow. That afternoon, Victor called her into his private office. The room was wood-paneled, hung with oil portraits of dead men who had built fortunes the same way Victor did, by breaking what others could not afford to fix. He gestured at the chair opposite his desk. "Sit." Mara obeyed. Her palms were dry. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing them sweat. "My son embarrassed this family," Victor began. "He embarrassed me. You were part of it. Whether you meant to or not, you became a symbol. I cannot allow symbols I do not control." "I didn't ask for any of this," Mara said softly. "You don't have to ask," Victor replied. "Power notices, and power decides." He slid a folder across the desk. Inside, a check. Enough money to erase debts, buy a new life, disappear. "Take it. Leave this city. If you don't, I'll make sure no door opens for you again." Mara looked down at the numbers. The ink was fresh, the paper heavy. The offer was temptation written in currency. She closed the folder and pushed it back. "You can buy silence, Mr. Hale, but you cannot buy choice. Not his, and not mine." Victor's eyes narrowed. "Then you've chosen war." The following week was a storm. Articles questioned Mara's past, twisting her story into whatever shape made the scandal louder. Some called her a manipulator, others called her a saint. She ignored both, because both were lies. At school, Ethan felt the weight of whispers. Children repeated what their parents had read. "Your dad's maid is your mum now?" A boy sneered. Ethan clenched his fists, but remembered Mara's calm when she faced his father. He said nothing, but the silence itself carried more defiance than words. Back at the mansion, Victor orchestrated dinners with investors to prove control. He paraded the candidates again, insisting Ethan reconsider. Each evening ended in silence, Ethan staring at his plate, refusing the theatre. Mara tried to keep her head down, continuing her work quietly, repairing what was broken and leaving rooms cleaner than she found them. But Ethan sought her out, bringing her small sketches, broken toys, stories about his mother whispered in the corners of hallways. Each time she listened, each time she offered only presence, never promises, and slowly Ethan's grief began to turn into something else, strength. One night, Victor stormed into the boy's room. "This ends now. Tomorrow you will choose properly, in front of the cameras, and you will undo this humiliation." Ethan looked at his father with steady eyes. "You can make me stand there. You can make me wear the suit. You can even make me smile, but you can't make me believe." Victor froze, struck not by rebellion, but by recognition. The boy had his late mother's stubbornness, and that was the one thing he could never dominate. He turned on his heel and left, slamming the door. Ethan sat back on his bed, clutching the patched airplane Mara had repaired. The seam was visible, but it held, and that was enough. The Hale mansion was quieter than it had ever been, not the comfortable silence of peace, but the strained quiet of walls holding their breath. Even the staff moved carefully, their footsteps softer, as if the house itself might shatter with one wrong sound. Victor buried himself in work. Meetings doubled, calls stretched into the night. He pushed new ventures forward with aggression, as though expanding his empire could erase the public stain his son had painted across it. Yet no matter how much money he moved, whispers followed him. The press dissected every decision. Late-night hosts made jokes at his expense. Investors began to wonder aloud if Victor Hale had finally lost control. Ethan noticed. He saw his father pacing, saw the tightened jaw, saw the eyes that never rested. For the first time in his life, Ethan realized his father was not untouchable. Power could be dented. At school, the taunts continued. Ethan carried his silence like armor, but armor is heavy, and children are not made for battle every day. One afternoon, when a group of boys cornered him on the playground, it was Mara who found him sitting alone, staring at the ground, fists clenched. "They don't matter," she said quietly, crouching beside him. "They say you don't belong," Ethan muttered. Mara paused, then nodded. "Maybe I don't, but neither do they, not really. Everyone's just trying to prove they're more important than someone else." He looked up at her, searching. "Do you believe that?" "I know it," she replied. "I've cleaned their homes. I've seen the cracks in their walls. Money covers a lot, Ethan, but it doesn't fix everything." Her voice carried no bitterness, only truth. And for Ethan, truth was a rare gift. Meanwhile, in the city, Victor's advisors pressed harder. "This maid must go," one insisted during a tense board meeting. "She undermines everything. Pay her off or bury her reputation." Victor's silence was more dangerous than shouting. He knew the man was right. Symbols mattered more than reality. But something in his son's defiance gnawed at him. Removing Mara would not remove the choice Ethan had already made. Late that night, Victor poured himself a drink in his study. The library shelves towered above him, filled with books no one read. He stared into the amber liquid as if it might provide answers. His wife's absence was a wound that still bled in silence, but he had learned to dress it with deals and distractions. Now his son was ripping away the bandages. He heard movement at the door. Ethan stood there holding the patched airplane. "Mom would have liked her," the boy said. Victor's throat tightened. He set the glass down harder than he meant to. "Go to bed." But the words lacked weight. Ethan didn't flinch. He simply turned and left, his footsteps steady, leaving Victor with the echo of truth he didn't want to face. Mara's life outside the mansion grew harder. The press hounded her. Strangers left notes under her apartment door, some filled with insults, others with desperate pleas for help she couldn't give. Her mother's health worsened, and medical bills piled higher. The temptation of Victor's check haunted her at night. With it, she could secure care, pay the debts, and disappear. Without it, she walked a tightrope with no net. But every time she remembered Ethan's small hand clutching hers in that ballroom, she knew she couldn't betray that trust. Some things were worth more than survival. One evening, as she left the mansion after her shift, she found Ethan waiting near the door. He held out the daisy she had once given him, now pressed flat between the pages of a book. "For you," he said. She took it, her throat tight. The flower was fragile, faded, but it had endured. Like them, inside the Empire's towers, enemies were circling. Competitors saw weakness. Journalists dug deeper, and among Victor's own advisors, ambition whispered. One of them, Alina Cortez, the tech magnate he had once introduced to Ethan, smiled too much during meetings. She offered solutions that cost him leverage. She asked questions about Mara that lingered like poison. Victor noticed, but for the first time he wasn't sure he could stop it, because for the first time he was fighting not just the market, not just the city. He was fighting his own son. And cracks were spreading through the empire faster than he could seal them. The newspapers no longer spoke of quarterly gains. They spoke of scandal, of shame, of a boy who had chosen the unthinkable. The story was too sweet for the media to abandon. Wealth, power, betrayal, and a maid who had become a symbol. Victor Hale tried to drown it with new contracts and public appearances, but everywhere he went, he saw the same thing. The gleam in people's eyes when they mentioned the Maid. His empire, built over decades, was now defined by someone who had never asked for the stage. Mara's days blurred together. The mansion had grown colder. Conversations dropped when she entered a room. Some staff avoided her, others whispered in corners. Once, she found her locker at work left open, her belongings scattered across the floor. A cruel message was scrawled on her apron, "Go back where you belong." She picked it up in silence, folded it neatly, and put it back in place. Humiliation burned, but she refused to let it define her. At home, her mother's cough worsened. Medical notices piled on the table. The electricity bill waited, threatening to darken their small apartment. At night, Mara lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the memory of Victor's check haunting her like a ghost. She could solve everything with one signature, but she knew it was not just money, it was a muzzle. Meanwhile, Ethan grew more protective. He noticed how Mara carried herself, how she forced calm, even when the air was heavy with malice. At school, he began answering the taunts with quiet defiance. "Say what you want," he told a sneering classmate. "At least she cares." One afternoon, Victor called another meeting in the mansion's great hall. Advisors, investors, and two of the spurned heiresses filled the space. The air smelled of perfume and polished wood, heavy and suffocating. "This situation must be resolved," an advisor declared. The boy must be corrected. If we allow this distraction to continue, the markets will turn on us. Victor's eyes swept the room, cold and calculating. He is my son. He will learn. And she, he spat the word like it tasted bitter, will be gone. The heiress in crimson smiled faintly, as though she had already won. What Victor did not notice was Ethan listening from the balcony above. The boy's small hands clenched the railing until his knuckles whitened. Every word cut deeper, but instead of breaking him, it sharpened his resolve. Later that evening, Ethan found Mara in the garden, trimming the dead leaves from a neglected rosebush. He hesitated before speaking. "They want you gone." She looked up, her hands stilling. "I know." "Are you afraid?" he asked. Her gaze softened. "Yes, but fear doesn't mean you stop. Fear means you know the cost and you go on anyway." He nodded slowly, absorbing the lesson. "I won't let them take you away." "You don't have to fight my battles, Ethan," she said gently, "but if you fight for truth, then you'll never be ashamed." For the first time in weeks, he smiled. The storm inside the mansion escalated. Anonymous letters arrived at Mara's apartment, filled with threats. One evening, when she left the mansion late, she found her bicycle slashed, the tires deflated. Shadows seemed to follow her on the street. And still she returned every morning. Still she did her work. Still she stood straight, even as the empire's weight pressed down on her shoulders. But humiliation has a way of spreading. One afternoon, during a charity luncheon, a guest raised his glass and sneered loud enough for all to hear. "Here's to the Hale boy, who wants a maid for a mother." Laughter rippled through the room. Victor's jaw tightened, but he did not defend his son. He said nothing, letting the cruelty stand. Ethan lowered his eyes, cheeks burning. He wanted to run, to hide, but then he remembered Mara's words. Fear means you know the cost, and you go on anyway. When the laughter faded, Ethan raised his own glass, filled only with water, and said clearly, "At least she knows how to care for someone. Can you say the same?" The room went silent. No one laughed. And for the first time, Victor saw that his son's defiance was not childish rebellion. It was conviction. That night, Victor confronted Mara in the servants' wing. "You are poisoning him against me," he accused. She shook her head, her voice steady. "I'm not teaching him to hate you. I'm teaching him not to hate himself." For a heartbeat, Victor had no answer. Then his mask returned. "You think you're strong? You're nothing but a servant, and servants can be replaced." He left, slamming the door, but the words hung in the corridor like smoke. Mara sat on the edge of her bed, exhaustion pressing on her shoulders. She was tired of being mocked, tired of being hunted. But when she thought of Ethan, of the fragile way he had clung to the patched airplane, she knew she could not abandon him. Humiliation had cut her deeply, but beneath the wounds, justice was beginning to rise. And soon, the Empire itself would learn what it meant to underestimate someone who had nothing left to lose. The first ally to drift away was not an investor or a board member. It was the press secretary who had crafted Victor Hale's public image for 8 immaculate years. She resigned in a 3-line email at dawn. "I can no longer defend what I do not believe. Please consider this my immediate departure." An hour later, 2 mid-level executives requested extended family leave. By noon, the company chat hummed with anonymous messages, blurry screenshots, and whispered doubts. The empire had not fallen. It had simply begun to tilt, and everyone could feel the floor shifting beneath their feet. Victor tried to smother the smoke with money. Bonuses were issued. A philanthropic pledge appeared on the corporate site, 10 million for children's hospitals. His legal counsel prepared a defamation suit against any outlet that mischaracterized the father's responsible guardianship. But the country had seen Ethan raise his glass and speak. They had seen the photograph of the patched wooden airplane in his hand, and they could not unsee it. It was a symbol money could not reseat. Even Victor's fiercest loyalists sensed it. The narrative had slipped from the boardroom and landed in a boy's small fingers. Mara did not want to be a symbol. The words sat on her shoulders like armor that did not fit. She still woke at 5 to change her mother's sheets, still scrubbed the linoleum until it shone. At the mansion, she moved through corridors where portraits watched her with oil-dark eyes. Staff avoided her gaze. A few offered quiet nods when no one was looking. Compassion had to sneak in this house. The board convened a private session. Victor entered with a rehearsed calm, tie-clipped, jaw set. He had counted the votes. They should still be his. On paper, at least. "Before we begin," the chairwoman said, "I would like to address the cultural environment under your leadership." She did not look at Victor as she spoke. She looked at the wall projector displaying a collage of headlines. "Boy defies billionaire father. Who is the maid?" Stock slip on ethical concerns. Cultural environment? Victor's smile did not reach his eyes. "We are discussing a child's impulsive moment amplified by a media economy that thrives on outrage." A younger director, usually mute in these meetings, cleared his throat. "Our customers are not buying outrage," he said. "They are buying trust, and the market is pricing in that we may have lost it." Victor's reply was smooth and swift. "Trust is restored by stability. Stability is restored by leadership." He let the word hang, heavy with self-reference. "Or by conscience," the chairwoman murmured. The vote did not happen that day. It didn't need to. Every person in the room left with the same private dread. The company could survive a quarter of red ink. It might not survive the impression that its leader had no soul. Outside the building, a small crowd gathered with cardboard signs. They were not professional protesters. They were cafeteria workers in hairnets, warehouse staff in faded jackets, a teacher still in her school lanyard. One sign read, "The boy is right." Another, "Respect the invisible." Their voices were not loud, but they were relentless. Passers-by filmed. The videos spread. That evening, Victor stood in his private gym, staring at his reflection. His body was sculpted by discipline, his schedule by control. Yet the mirror returned a stranger, successful, sleepless, hollow. He punched the bag twice, 3 times, until the chain rattled. The noise satisfied nothing. When the bag stilled, he was a man again, breathing hard in a quiet room. He showered, dressed, and went to find his son. Ethan was in the library, tracing the grain of the patched airplane with his thumb. He did not look up when Victor entered. "You embarrassed us," Victor said. The words were measured as if read from a page. "There are ways to disagree that do not jeopardize a company." Ethan kept his eyes on the plane. "There are ways to be a father that do not jeopardize a child." For a moment, Victor forgot his lines. He remembered the first time he had held the boy, the weight of a life placed in his arms like a crown. He had vowed to build a world where nothing could hurt his son. Somewhere along the way, he had become the thing to fear. "Your world is built on fairy tales," he said at last. "People like us do not get to choose with feelings." "People," Ethan repeated softly, "like us." The boy rose, set the airplane carefully on the table, and walked past his father without asking permission. The door clicked behind him with the politeness of a slammed gate. At the apartment, Mara's mother watched the evening news with the volume low. Her breath was shallow, her medication too expensive to stretch. "They keep showing your face," she whispered. "Do you want this?" "No," Mara said. "But the truth doesn't ask what we want." She brewed tea and stared at the steam. She had thought cruelty came as a shout. She had learned it could come as a polite process, a test with rules designed to fail you, an invitation to step onto a stage where the trapdoor waited. She had also learned that conscience could be stubborn. It could survive on almost nothing. The next day, the chairwoman requested a private conversation with Mara, off-site, unrecorded. They met in a plain conference room above a community centre. The chairwoman arrived alone, her hair pulled back, her coat cheap enough to pass unnoticed on a bus. "I will be direct," she said. "The board is evaluating all scenarios. Some include Mr. Hale staying, some do not. In either case, the company's foundation needs to shift. We are considering a public ethics council with community representatives, not a window dressing, a real one. If it exists, it must begin with the people we have most failed to see." Mara's instinct was to refuse. Her life was not a brochure, but the chairwoman's eyes did not ask for a headline. They asked for a chance. "What would you want from me?" Mara said. "Honesty, when it hurts, especially then." Mara thought of the mansion corridors, the silences that protected power, the way truth bent around money like a river around stone. "Then I will say this," she replied. "An ethics council cannot exist while a man believes his son is an asset and a maid is a threat. You can build a table, but if he still sits at the head of it, nothing changes." The chairwoman did not argue. "Understood," she said. "Thank you." Word of the meeting reached Victor before dinner. He was waiting for Mara when she returned to the mansion. No witnesses, no audience. "You are negotiating with my company." "I am telling the truth to your company," she said. He laughed once, softly. "Conscience is a poor currency." "It buys sleep," she said, "when everything else is gone." The line cut him. He turned away and looked out the window, down at the city he had tamed. Cars, lights, the river like a strip of metal. He had always believed the view proved he was right. Tonight it looked like distance. 2 days later, the first investor published an open letter. It was not framed as rebellion, it was framed as concern. "We believe leadership must demonstrate empathy as a strategic asset. We encourage immediate governance reform." The stock dipped again, no longer panicked, just tired. In the cafeteria, a custodian named Harlan taped a printout above the time clock. The photograph of Ethan's hand around the little wooden wing. No caption. People stopped and looked on their way to mop floors, to stack crates, to return to the parts of the empire that made it run. The image spread through the building like a quiet hymn. Victor felt the shift and did what he had always done. He convened power, a closed-door summit, donors and media barons, a judge who owed him favors. The room smelled of leather and victory. He explained the plan. A philanthropy blitz, an exclusive profile, a private school endowment for underprivileged talent. He would drown conscience in gold. But favors have half-lives, and fear migrates. The media baron's eyes slid to the window. The judge's phone vibrated with texts he did not answer. Donors asked about optics. The room nodded, but no one committed. When the meeting ended, handshakes felt like receipts. That night, the protest outside doubled. It was still small, still polite. But someone had brought candles, and someone else had printed flyers with a single sentence. "Treat the boy like a son, and the maid like a person." The words were too simple for spin. Ethan watched from an upstairs window, the patched airplane pressed to the glass. He did not see radicals. He saw regular people with tired faces choosing to stand anyway. He felt something steady rise in him, not defiance this time, direction. He went to Mara's small room by the back stairs and knocked. When she opened, he held out the airplane. "I think he wants to talk to you," Ethan said. Mara blinked. "Your father?" Ethan nodded. "He doesn't know it yet, but he does." Mara took the airplane, not like a gift, but like a task. "What should I say?" "Say what you always say," Ethan answered. "Say the thing that hurts and heals." She found Victor in the library. He did not look surprised to see her, only tired, as if the rooms themselves had been wearing him down. "Your son believes you can listen," she said. "I am choosing to believe him." Victor gestured to a chair. "Say it then. The thing that hurts and heals." Mara sat. She set the patched plane on the table between them. Power is not what you think it is. You can sign a check and end a career with a phone call. That is force. Power is when a boy chooses to stand next to you without being told. You have force. You do not have power. He stared at the little plane, at the uneven wing held by an elastic band. His throat tightened against words he could not yet speak. "If you want power," she continued, "stop arranging the world and start repairing what you broke. Begin with him, not by buying a school or a headline, by showing up, by learning how to be told no, by letting him keep this," she tapped the plane, "even when it makes you look small." Silence settled between them, not empty, not hostile. A space made for an answer. Victor reached for the plane. His fingers hovered, then withdrew. "I don't know how," he said. The confession was so quiet it almost wasn't there. "I don't know how to be what he needs." Mara stood. "Start by not knowing. He will teach you." When she left the library, Victor stayed, hands open, the city dimming beyond the glass. Somewhere outside, a chant rose and fell. It was not angry. It was patient. He listened until the words separated into syllables, and the syllables into breath. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar break loose inside his chest. It was not defeat. It was room. The leak did not arrive as a scandalized headline or a clandestine audio file. It came as a letter, 3 pages, scanned in grey, the edges frayed, the handwriting neat and unmistakably old-fashioned. The email subject line was plain. From a house that forgot its heart. It spread first through staff group chats, then to reporters who had been refreshing 100 empty inboxes. By lunchtime, half the city had it on their phones. The author signed with a single name, Julia, longtime house manager, keeper of keys and calendars, the person who had ironed 1,000 shirts and remembered birthdays that others forgot. Her letter did not accuse. It witnessed. "I've worked in the Hale household for 27 years. I saw a young man become a famous executive. I saw a house turn quiet when a good woman passed. I saw a boy grow tall without anyone measuring him against a door frame. I also saw a small airplane mended with a rubber band. I saw whose hands did the mending. When we speak of fitness to lead, we should not begin with portfolios. We should begin with who bends to pick up what breaks. No gossip, no numbers, just the kind of details that are impossible to invent and difficult to deny." Julia wrote about library nights when the lights stayed on, but no story was read. She described the way Mara learned the creak of certain steps so the boy would not wake when she changed the light bulb outside his room. She admitted her own complicity, how silence pays a mortgage, and ended with a line that did not fit on a t-shirt but lodged in the throat. "I am leaving this job because I'm tired of polishing a silver frame around an empty picture." By mid-afternoon, the company's PR team had 3 responses drafted. Each was wrong in a different way. They all assumed the audience was still counting profits. The audience was counting doors without pencil marks, a child without a bedtime voice. The board convened again. This time, there was an agenda item the chairwoman had postponed as long as she could. A resolution to separate the roles of CEO and board chair. A structural rebuke dressed as best practice. Victor entered late, the letter printed and folded once in his breast pocket, like an accusation close to the heart. He carried himself with the same steel posture, but a new fragility threaded through his silence. "We will proceed to vote," the chairwoman said. "No speeches, the market is watching." The market always watched, but that afternoon so did cafeteria workers on break and warehouse pickers between aisles. So did the teacher with the school lanyard who had stood outside the building with a cardboard sign. So did a boy upstairs, pressing a patched wing against a window as if touch could steady glass. Ballots were digital. Names flashed green or red in a column only the directors could see. The silence in the room felt like the space before thunder. The motion passed. 7-4. Formally, it meant Victor would remain CEO, but lose the chair's gavel. Practically, it meant the room had learned to say no to him and live. He did not protest. He had learned that power resists less loudly when it is certain of returning. He also knew that sometimes it doesn't. "Thank you," he said, voice controlled, almost gentle. "Let's build something that holds." No one looked quite sure whether he meant the company or his life. Outside, the crowd learned the news in the time it takes a notification to light a screen. There were no cheers. A murmur rolled through like wind through grass. Structural change mattered, but they were waiting for moral change, the kind that doesn't fit in bylaws. That evening, the community center on Alder Street smelled of coffee and floor wax. Folding chairs filled the gymnasium. A hand-painted banner read, "Listening Night." The organizers had invited neighbors, employees, foster parents, a retired nurse, a poet, a bus driver. They had also invited Mara. She almost said no. The word spokesperson felt like a door she did not want to walk through. But Julia's letter had broken something open in the city, and someone had to step into the space before noise filled it. She arrived in the same plain dress she wore to visit her mother. No stage lights, no teleprompter, just a microphone on a stand that squealed once and surrendered. She looked over faces lined by work and humidity and decided not to give a speech. She would tell a story. "When I was 10, she began, "my grandfather taught me how to fix a chair." A small laugh moved through the room. Oregon chairs did not often make the news. He said, "Mara, a good repair isn't invisible. It's honest. You can see where the glue dried and the clamp left a dent. That's how you know where the love went." She glanced toward the back where Ethan sat, feet not quite reaching the floor, the patched plane in his lap like a quiet badge. "I do not know how to run a company," she said. "I know how to see a person. I know the difference between force and power. Force makes people sit down. Power makes people stand next to you on their own. If you ask me what leadership looks like, I will say mark the doorframes, read at night, mend what your hands can reach, and stop pretending the repair should be invisible." A woman in scrubs wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand. A warehouse picker filmed on his phone, not for virality, but to show a friend who was on night shift. In a corner, the chairwoman of the board listened without notes. She had come to watch and ended up to learn. During the Q&A, a teenager in a hoodie raised his chin with too much bravado for how much his voice shook. "What if people don't change?" he asked. Mara considered the question the way she considered stains. Some needed soap, some needed time, some needed light. "Then we keep the lights on," she said, "and we keep the door open. Because sometimes people don't change until a child stands in the doorway and doesn't move." A hand went up near the exit. Julia, smaller than her letter, hair grey and tidy, did not want the microphone. She wanted to say only one sentence. "Forgive me," she said, looking at no one and everyone. "It took me too long to speak." "Thank you for speaking," Mara answered. "We needed you." Afterward, in the narrow hallway that smelled like gym dust and printer ink, Ethan waited with his plane. "You sounded like my mum used to," he told Mara. "I didn't know your mum," Mara said softly. "You do now," he replied, tapping the patched wing. "She's in this." On the other side of the city, Victor read Julia's letter by lamplight, as if it were scripture from a faith he had refused and suddenly needed. He underlined nothing. Some words do not improve with a pen. When he finished, he did not pour a drink. He picked up his phone and typed a message he deleted 3 times before sending. "Thank you for your years. I am sorry it took your leaving for me to listen. V." He did not expect a reply. He received one anyway. "Make the boy's doorframe honest. Start there." Day. The next morning, he stood in the hallway outside Ethan's room with a pencil and a ruler like a man approaching an altar. He knocked. The door opened. The boy looked at the pencil, then at his father's face, searching for performance. He didn't find it. He stepped close to the frame and stood straight. "What should I write?" Victor asked. "My name," Ethan said. "And the date." Victor wrote as if the wood might split under the pressure of his care. The mark was small, ordinary, unmistakably real. He placed the pencil on the crown molding, where it would wait for next time. A ritual planted. In the afternoon, the board issued a statement about governance changes. The market steadied by a degree that would bore anyone not holding shares. But a different steadiness took root elsewhere. The community center announced a monthly listening night. The first speaker would be a foster dad, the second, a cafeteria worker, the third, a boy who wanted to explain why a patched wing flies better. That evening, a local paper ran a headline that would never trend nationwide, but made people in grocery lines nod. "Company reorganizes. City remembers its heart." Under it, a photograph of the gymnasium. Folding chairs, bad lighting, faces turned toward a woman in a plain dress who spoke as if repair were holy. Victor saw the paper and did not call his PR team. He called the nurse at the clinic where Mara's mother lived and asked what they needed that no one ever funds. When she told him night shift relief and better wheelchair tires, he said yes without a press release. He was learning the difference between donation and repair. Near midnight, he opened the library window. The small protest outside had dwindled to a few candle cups on the steps, circles of wax like pale moons. He wanted to go out and say something, but he had begun to understand that saying is the last step. He closed the window and walked to the hallway. He paused at the doorframe and touched the pencil mark with 2 fingers. He whispered a line that no one heard. "Hold." The house did not answer. It did not need to. For the first time in years, it felt like a place where a person might be measured and found growing. The house woke early, as if the pencil mark itself were an alarm. Victor brewed coffee without asking anyone to do it for him, mismeasured, and started over. He resisted the impulse to draft a checklist. Presents cannot be bullet-pointed. At 7:10, Ethan padded into the kitchen in socks, hair disordered, plane in hand. He looked like most boys on most mornings, which made him look like a miracle. "Pancakes?" Victor asked. "You don't know how," Ethan said, not unkindly. "I can learn." They burned the first batch and ate from the second, with maple syrup and apologies. Victor discovered that a child's conversation does not arrive on demand. Questions had to be offered like bread, broken and left on the table. "Do you want me at your game on Saturday?" He tried. "Coach says parents yell too much," Ethan said, then glanced up. "You can come if you want." Want. The smallest invitation, the largest door. At 8 SAC, Victor was meant to be in a room of glass and slides, the kind of meeting that feeds investor hunger without nourishing anything else. He sent a note to the chairwoman. "I'll be 30 minutes late. I have a school drop-off." He stood in the hallway while Ethan tied his shoes the slow way, rabbit ears and a pause to listen for a sound only he could hear. On the drive, traffic collected like coins in a jar. Ethan held the plane to the window and moved it through invisible weather. "Do you have to pick me up?" he asked. "I'd like to," Victor said, "but I can ask Mara if—" "I know," Ethan said and turned the plane toward the sun. "There were some rituals you did not replace, some you could share." The meeting began without him, which meant it began without his gravity. When he arrived, he was not a storm, but weather. The new independent chair ran the first half. She was merciful and precise. When it was Victor's turn, he did something he had not done in years. He said the words, "I don't know," out loud. "I don't know if we can hit the old growth target and keep faith with our people," he said. "I know which one matters more. We'll build a new target." An executive at the far end of the table, Harper, whose forecasts had always pleased the street, shifted in her chair. The market expects signals, not sermons. So do children, Victor said evenly. We owe both the truth. Signals arrived anyway. At noon, a startup publication breathless for controversy ran a piece. Janitor to general counsel, community centre Darling Lands, job offer from rival fund. The article included a photograph of Mara leaving the Alder Street gym, hair pulled back, expression tired and private. A source close to negotiations said a national philanthropic conglomerate wanted to hire her as a face of reform at a salary that could buy new doorframes for 100 houses. Mara saw the headline when her phone vibrated against the mop sink. She had been disinfecting a classroom after a stomach bug made a map of the floor. She did not recognize the source and did not like being called a darling. An hour later, the offer arrived for real. Forwarded by a friend of a friend, wrapped in polite language and bright numbers. The role would require travel, cameras, and a story shaped by people who pronounce the word community as if it were a product line. She put the phone face down and finished the room. When she stepped outside, the air smelled like rain that couldn't choose. Her mother's clinic texted an update about new wheelchair tires arriving. She remembered Victor's question, "What do you need that no one funds?" and felt a calm tug, not toward gratitude, but toward the work itself. The offer promised resources. The offer also promised distance. At 3:40, a different notification broke the day. Walk out at Hale Foods Distribution Center, planned for Friday, 10 a.m. The flyer used the word listen, the way company memos use optimize. The organizers were the workers who had crowded the sidewalk 2 weeks earlier with cardboard signs that looked like homework. They asked for rest breaks that happened when promised, hazard pay that didn't evaporate after headlines, and a seat in the room where schedules were made. Victor's phone lit up with 3 schools of advice: legal, financial, reputational, delay, contain, reframe. He stood in his office without his jacket and considered all the verbs available to a person who had run out of nouns. He typed a note to the operations chief. Don't discipline anyone who walks. Open the loading dock gate, put a microphone on a crate and plug it in. To say what, came the reply. Nothing, Victor wrote. To listen. At 4:05, he was back in the school pickup line for the first time in his life. He did not know which lane moved faster. He did not know that you have to wave at the crossing guard every day as if his whistle were a trumpet that saved entire kingdoms. He learned quickly. Ethan slid into the passenger seat, backpack heavy with math and crumbs. "Can we go to the creek?" the boy asked. "Now?" "Before homework," Ethan said, invoking an article of faith older than corporate bylaws. The creek ran behind the community center, a narrow band of water that made its own laws. Boys waded in rubber boots and emerged with diplomacy treaties involving sticks. Victor and Mara met at the bend without planning to. Ethan made a sound that could have been hello or flight and splashed downstream to join a small parliament of dragons. "They offered me a job with a microphone," Mara said. Victor looked out across the water. "Do you want it?" "I want the tires to keep arriving," she said, "but I want to carry them in my own hands." "That fund could carry a lot," he said carefully, aware of how easily advice can become control. They stood with their feet in the same mud, which made the conversation harder to lie in. "I saw," Mara said. "Will you show up?" "As what?" he asked. "A CEO who ruined the week or a father with a pencil?" "Maybe both," she said. "People are complicated." "Tell me something I don't want to hear," Victor said. Mara thought. "You keep trying to fix your reputation with acts that look like repair. But repair is slow and mostly invisible. If it starts showing up on billboards, it stops being repair." "I didn't buy a billboard," he said. "You don't have to," she said gently. "People will bring you one for free." Your job is to say no. He nodded, almost grateful for the assignment. What should I say yes to? Friday, and whatever comes after, when the cameras leave. The next 40 hours arranged themselves like dominoes. The board signed off on a memo that did not say support or oppose. It said, attend to. Harper sent a blistering email about ceding control to chaos. The chairwoman replied with one sentence, control is what you hold while you listen. Mara returned a call to the fund and asked 3 questions the recruiter had not prepared to answer. How many of your grants include salaried custodial staff for bathrooms everyone uses? When was your last listening night without a podium? Do you mark your own door frames? The recruiter said they were excited to explore innovative metrics. Mara said thank you and hung up. On Friday morning, the distribution center looked like a place that had remembered it was a place where bodies move. Workers gathered beneath a corrugated awning. Someone set a crate on its side and taped a microphone to a broom handle. Security stood back with hands unclasped. Reporters framed their shots and waited for a villain. Victor arrived with no entourage. He took off his watch and put it in his pocket the way a man might remove a ring before kneading dough. He did not climb the crate. He stood in the second row, beside a woman whose name badge read Lola Knights. The first speaker was a picker with tendinitis in her right wrist and a daughter who kept her awake in the good way. The second was a driver who had almost fallen asleep on Highway 26 after a double. The third was a temp who wanted to be permanent, not because it meant a title, but because it meant a calendar with holidays you can rely on the way you rely on sunrise. "Boss wants to talk?" someone shouted. Victor felt the weight of the broom handle microphone turning toward him like a compass needle. He shook his head. "Not today," he said, loud enough to carry. "I'm here to write down what you say and read it back to the people who think they already know it." A murmur, suspicion, then a cautious silence. Lola lifted her chin. "Read it back now." Victor opened a small notebook he had not bought for the occasion. "Rest breaks scheduled are not rest breaks taken," he read. "Overtime should not be a surprise party. The floor aisles are mapped for pallets, not for people. Night shift needs a nurse, not a vending machine that sells aspirin." The crowd did not cheer. They corrected him. "It's not aspirin," someone said. "It's ibuprofen, and it costs $3. He wrote it down, the price of a painkiller becoming policy. A union steward cleared his throat. "We'll bring our list Monday," he said. "Will you bring yours?" "No," Victor said. "I'll bring a calendar and the person who signs." Afterward, a reporter cornered him near the loading dock door. "Is this theatre?" she asked. "It's Friday," he said. "Theatre's on Saturday." She almost smiled, then didn't. "What changed your mind?" He could have said a letter. He could have said a boy with a plane. He could have said a pencil line on wood. "I went to a creek," he said instead, because sometimes the truest answer is not the most revealing one. Across town, Mara sat at her mother's clinic and filled in a volunteer form for Sunday afternoons. Reading hour, wheelchair tire checks, phone calls to relatives who lived 2 time zones away. She wrote her name in tidy print and added her number again, just in case. At dusk, Ethan stood under the doorframe and asked to be measured. He had grown 1/8 of an inch since Tuesday. "It counts," he declared. Victor drew the line and wrote the date. "It counts," he agreed. The house did not become a different house in a day, but the pencil marks accumulated, and the listening did not wait for press cycles, and a field once ruled by signals began to learn the grammar of repair. On the kitchen table, the pancake skillet sat clean and drying. Beneath it, Victor slipped a card he had written and rewritten all afternoon. Alder Street, listening night needs folding chairs repaired and stacked every 3rd Thursday. I volunteer. V. He did not take a picture of the card. He did not send a text about it. He left it where a person would find it by accident, which is to say, on purpose. In the living room, Ethan crafted a runway out of hardcover books. The plane with the patched wing lifted, dipped, and lifted again. "Field test," he announced. Mara laughed. "Did it pass?" "It's still flying," he said. "That's how you know." Monday arrived with the smell of wet cardboard and hot coffee. Factory weather. The walkout had not toppled anything visible. None of the cameras returned. But in the distribution center, where weeks were counted in shifts and backs, something had shifted. The crate with the taped microphone was gone. In its place stood a standing fan and a folding table with a handwritten sign, "Scheduling notes here." Below it, a stack of blank index cards and a pen tied with twine. Victor came without a blazer, sleeves rolled up to the same place they had been on Friday, as if time had paused there. Beside him stood Rosa from HR, who speaks both the handbook and the break room, and the operations manager who had once treated clipboards like shields, now holding only a stopwatch and a patient face. The union steward nodded, but did not smile. "You brought a calendar?" he asked. Victor lifted a spiral-bound planner, the kind high school students use. It looked unserious until you noticed the inked-in blocks. Names next to hours, tasks next to names, arrows that meant flexibility, not evasion. The steward set down his own folder. Its spine was cracked with years. The first agreement was not a headline. It was 3 columns on a whiteboard, rest breaks locked at the 2-hour mark on heavy lanes. Overtime posted 48 hours in advance except hazard events. Night shift nurse trial for 60 days, review at 30. No one clapped. 2 workers asked if the nurse could also carry hot packs. A picker asked whether the 2-hour clock starts at scan-in or at floor entry. Rosa answered, "Floor entry." Victor wrote it down. The union steward drew a square around trial, like a warning. "If it's theatre," he said, "there will be a second walkout and we won't bring a microphone." "It isn't," Victor said. "We're learning to build without spotlights." When they finished, a driver named Deshawn hung back. "I'm not here to say thanks," he said, voice flat. "I'm here to say my boys' school calls me when I'm in the last mile of a double and I ain't got a way to answer. If you fix that, one number I can give the dispatcher to trigger a 10-minute pause, I'll say thanks." Victor nodded. "I'll have it before Friday." He didn't know how yet, but some promises you write in ink before you source the parts. Back downtown, the boardroom had entered its own weather system. The independent chair kept the agenda disciplined. The numbers arrived like trains. Harper, however, arrived with something else. A pamphlet. Glossy. Timed. "Brand recovery narrative," she said, letting the stack fan across the table. On the cover, a photograph of Victor speaking at the walkout. How had anyone gotten that angle? With an overlaid headline, "From Empire to Empathy, a CEO's Road Back." The subtitle promised a mini-documentary, podcast tour, and a charity gala rebranded as Listening Live. The chair lifted the top copy, skimmed, and set it down as if it were warm. "Harper, no!" "Perception is capital," Harper replied. "We can't afford to let the street write our story. We write it, or it writes us." Victor recognized the old reflex in her voice, the need to architect the mirror rather than the room. He also recognized the trap. If he rejected the plan on moral grounds alone, she would pivot to fiduciary duty. So he went not to ethics first, but to efficacy. "The dark and the tour convert private repair into public product," he said. "The people we most need to stand with will recognize the extraction. We will look like we learned a new language and used it to sell shirts." "It's not shirts," Harper said. "It's survival." The chairwoman turned the pamphlet closed with a single finger. "No gala, no documentary. If there is a story, the workers will tell it to their own cameras, not ours. We'll publish minutes and progress. That's it." Harper's jaw set. "Then I'll take a different route." It was not mutiny, not yet. It was a flare over water. Mara encountered the same weather in another key. a national morning show called the Community Center, then her phone, then the center again. The producer was kind the way a hook is curved. "Your story is the story," she said. "A woman who cleans for a living, teaching a billionaire to listen. It's America." "I didn't teach anyone," Mara said. "We're all learning." "Exactly." The producer's voice brightened. "We want to empower your voice. There'll be hair and makeup. We'll bring a car." Mara looked at the plywood clipboard where she kept the center's small economy. Snack invoices, light bulb receipts, a list of volunteers who could be counted on to show up when the childcare room overflowed. She thought of her mother's quiet yes to Sunday reading hour. She thought of the creek. "I'll come," she said, "if you do it from here. No studio, no makeup. You sit in our folding chairs. You interview the people who use the place, not me." A pause. "Producers know silence is expensive. We can consider a field segment," the woman said finally, "but we'd still need you in New York for the Live A block." "Then it's a no," Mara said, polite as a closed door. "We don't mark our door frames so someone else can sand them off." That night, Victor went to Ethan's school for a parent meeting titled Digital Lives. He had promised the principal last week when she cornered him on the sidewalk. He almost cancelled twice, once for a director's dinner, once because Harper scheduled a strategy circle at the same hour with 3 sympathetic VPs. He chose the cafeteria over the circle, texted the chair that he'd take the notes later, and walked into the multipurpose room that smells like crayons and decisions. "Phones are not demons," the presenter said, clicking a slide that showed a brain lit up like a city. "They're just faster mirrors." The school counselor spoke about a kindness campaign, students writing each other postcards instead of posts. They needed parent volunteers to sort, stamp, and read for red flags. Victor raised his hand. He was the only one in a suit jacket, which felt like a costume in that room. He removed it and draped it over the chair. On the drive home, Ethan sat soft with the kind of tired that children earn. "There's a kid in my class," he said, voice low. "They call him Spam because he talks a lot about airplanes and nobody answers, and then he keeps talking." Ethan paused. "It's not nice." "What do you do?" Victor asked. "I tell him about my plane," Ethan said. "But then Taylor rolls her eyes and everyone laughs and I don't know if I made it worse." Victor stared at the red light, counting backwards. Repair is not dramaturgy. It is habit. "Tomorrow," he said, "let's invite him to build a runway at recess. Bring 2 books from the library, not 1. If Taylor rolls her eyes, I'll roll mine back." Ethan snorted. "That's not how it works." "I know," Victor said, "but I'll be there." "School says no parents at recess." "I mean, I'll be there after," he said, "to hear how it went. That counts." It did. The next afternoon, Ethan reported that Spam is really named Avi, which of course meant air in his mother's first language, and the runway worked, and Taylor said it was babyish until Avi explained lift, and then it wasn't. The week sharpened. Harper's different route materialized as leaks to a financial blog that drinks cynicism neat. Sources, Hale Foods, CEO orchestrates walkout optics as part of image rehab. The piece quoted an anonymous senior leader questioning the cost of the nurse trial and the open mic circus. The stock dipped 2%. The comment section baptized Victor in the usual acids. The chair called him. "You want me to hunt the leak?" "No," Victor said. "Let her spend the only currency she believes in. We'll spend ours." He logged into the company's intranet and posted a memo not to the market but to everyone who touches a pallet, a scanner, or a scheduling grid. It outlined the 3 commitments: the 30-day review, the phone number dispatchers could call to trigger a 10-minute pause for family emergencies, Deshawn's ask, built over a weekend by a fleet coordinator who'd always wanted to be seen. It also included a link to a form. "Tell us what we missed." It took less than 3 minutes to fill. A comment appeared under the post from Lola. No heart emojis, just, "The nurse brought hot packs. Good start." Harper messaged him privately. "Your bleeding authority." he replied. Maybe it wasn't mine to keep. On Thursday evening, the morning show called back. They'd reimagined the segment. A satellite truck would arrive at Alder Street at 6 a.m., and the host would toss to Mara live right there on the ground, with a tiny earpiece and the same questions they would have asked in the studio. It wasn't what Mara had asked for, but it was something like weather cooperating. She said yes, then called Victor. "You can't be here," she told him. "If you stand behind me, you become the story again." "I'll be down the block," he said. "I'll move folding chairs and steal their pastries for the kids." At dawn, the truck exhaled cables like a sea creature. The host, perfect in a coat the color of winter fruit, smiled on cue. "We're with Mara Ortiz," who became a national conversation when Mara interrupted gently. "We're with Alder Street," she said. "You'll hear from Mrs. Han, who runs after-school math with a jar of jelly beans, and from Jamir, who mops this floor at night and fixes bikes on Saturdays. I'll hold the mic." The host blinked, then recovered. "Live TV is a river, it punishes dams." They handed Mara the stick. The segment became hands and faces. Mrs. Han laughed into the wrong end of the microphone and the country heard it. Jamir said there's a loose tile by the back door that takes a twist to sit right, and the camera didn't quite see it, but it believed him. After, the producer approached Mara with that eager look that says, "Contract." Mara handed her a list instead. Names of 3 other centers, one in a city with no cameras at all. "Call them," she said. "They need money for wheelchair tires." By afternoon, donations arrived without hashtags. A carpenter showed up at Alder Street with a belt sander and a question about door frames. The receptionist pointed to the pencil marks. He smiled and put away the sander. At home that night, Victor found a postcard on the kitchen table addressed to Avi. The handwriting was uneven and brave. Ethan had written, "Thank you for explaining lift. Your ideas make our class fly." He licked the stamp with ceremony. Victor set 2 planes on the counter, the patched one and the uneven one he had made with his own hands. "Field test?" Ethan asked. "Field test," Victor said. They walked to the back stoop. The evening had the kind of light that makes ordinary things admit they're beautiful. The planes rose, stalled, recovered. The patched wing held. The rough wing learned air. Inside, Victor's phone buzzed with a message from the chair. Board adopted the rest break policy permanently. Nurse trial extended. Harper requested leave. He exhaled and did not smile. The work wasn't victory, it was velocity under control. He wrote a line in his planner under Friday. "Listening is not the meeting. It is the way through the week." In the hall, Ethan pressed his head against the doorframe, waiting for the taller pencil to tell the truth. It did. He grinned as if he had invented growth. "Counts?" he asked. "Counts," Victor said. And in a city where the first storm had passed, the aftershocks kept moving, less dramatic, more decisive, the kind of motion that looks like life getting heavier in the right places. Friday ended with no headlines, no leaks, no staged photographs. It ended with people leaving work at the time, printed on their schedules, tired in the honest way. It ended with Victor standing in the distribution center lobby while Lola handed him a clipboard with signatures confirming rest breaks had been taken as promised. He signed at the bottom without fanfare, as if contracts were not documents but habits. At home, Ethan darted through the hall like a boy whose shoes remember playgrounds. He stopped at the doorframe, craned his neck and announced, "Measure." Victor marked the wood. "A 1/4 inch since Monday." "Counts," Ethan said. "Counts," Victor echoed. The word had become their creed. That night, Mara came by to drop off forms from the community center. Volunteer rosters, snack budgets, a flyer for listening night. She hesitated at the door, then stepped inside. The house smelled different now, like food actually cooked there, like books pulled off shelves and not just dusted. She glanced at the pencil marks on the doorframe and allowed herself the smallest smile. "You kept it," she said. "He insisted," Victor replied. Ethan barreled in with his patched airplane. "We're testing again," he said, "this time with Dad's." He pointed to the uneven one Victor had carved. The two planes launched across the living room. One wobbled, the other soared crooked, but both landed intact. Ethan whooped, declared a tie, and disappeared toward the kitchen for juice. Silence lingered between Victor and Mara, no longer hostile, not yet simple. He broke it. "You turned down the national job." "I did," she said. "Why?" "Because Alder Street isn't a stage. It's a home. They don't need me on television. They need me at the folding chairs." Victor nodded slowly. "And if I told you I needed you here?" Her eyes held his for a long second. "Then I'd say, prove it with more than words." He almost smiled, because for once he did not have words ready. He had only the possibility of repair. The following week, Harper's resignation letter arrived. It was terse, calculated and irrelevant before the ink dried. The board appointed a new director from the community center, Jameer, the night janitor who fixed bikes. Reporters laughed at first. They stopped laughing when quarterly results showed productivity stable and turnover declining. Repair was not fast, but it was contagious. Victor kept showing up. At school conferences, at Alder Street, at a warehouse potluck where he ate chili from a styrofoam bowl and listened to a story about pallets stacked like dominoes. Each time he expected suspicion. Each time he found it, less sharp, more patient. At home, he learned bedtime. Not perfect. Sometimes he read spreadsheets with the cadence of fairy tales. Ethan corrected him, but the boy's laughter sounded like a pencil mark on a doorframe, permanent in its way. One evening, after another clumsy dinner attempt, Victor stood on the porch with Mara. The city buzzed around them, lights like 100 possibilities. "I used to think power was the room where people waited for me to speak," he said. "And now?" she asked. "Now I think power is the room where people keep talking when I listen." Mara looked at him as if measuring, not his words, but his growth. "Then maybe you're ready to stop building empires and start building people." The last act came not with applause, but with a simple moment at Ethan's school. Parents were invited to Community Day, where children displayed projects. Ethan and Avi, Spam, no longer, had built a runway from poster board and duct tape. Planes lined its surface like promises. Ethan spoke first. "This one has a patched wing. This one was made rough but still flies. Both count." Teachers clapped. Parents nodded. Victor's throat tightened, not with pride, but with the ache of repair. He glanced at Mara, who stood beside Ethan, not behind him. The justice was not in shareholders or headlines. It was in a boy allowed to choose his own words, in a maid no longer invisible, in a father who had finally stepped out of his own shadow. That night, Victor marked the doorframe again. He wrote not just the date, but 3 words beneath Ethan's name: "Still counts here." The house no longer felt like an empire. It felt like a home that remembered its heart. And for the first time in years, when Victor looked at his son, he did not see succession or legacy. He saw growth, honest, visible, permanent. The kind you measure in inches, the kind you measure in love.